Hey everyone, welcome to the final lecture of the semester. I will try to keep it really short and sweet. So what we're going to do is just briefly talk about how humans have affected the environment and how climate change is also affecting our environment and the future of Earth. So the biggest question we have to ask is, have humans affected the environment? And the answer is unequivocally yes. We have absolutely affected it in mostly negative ways. Unfortunately, our success has meant harm to other species because we have taken over so many different areas of the world and exploited it and used it to our advantage. Unfortunately, that has come at the cost of others. I like this particular quote from the Phelan textbook I used in my ankeny course. We interfere with other species' ability to coexist with us. This is kind of a backwards way of looking at things because we often think about species, we coexist with species, but they have to coexist with us as well. And we have taken their habitats and turned it into our own and changed things for the worse for a lot of different species. Now, we've already talked a lot about biodiversity all throughout the semester, but I just want to mention it one more time that the more different types of organisms there are, the better chance there is of survival for all involved. Because the more different types of, say, food or vegetation exist for an animal, the less likely they are to be harmed if one goes extinct. I used the example, I think, the other day of the butterfly and the milkweed, the monarch, and how the monarch relies solely on the milkweed for its food. And if they do not have the milkweed, then they will die out. And then all the animals that rely on them for food, all the flowers that rely on them for pollination, those will not have those sources anymore. And it could cause an entire ecosystem collapse across the entire United States and Mexico, and maybe even Canada somewhat because of where the monarchs live and migrate to. We're in the midst of a mass extinction. There have been around 1,000 species extinct in the last 500 years. 1,000 different types of organisms extinct, gone forever from this earth in the last 500 years. In the last 500 years is when we have made some of the biggest technological advancements in the history of humanity. There is a Wikipedia list that I discovered that is the list of recently extinct mammals. And on this we have the brambleman malomie, which just went extinct in 2016, just last year. That scientists were devastated they couldn't save it, and there are now no longer any in existence. One of the biggest ways that we have affected the environment is by habitat destruction. So this is an area of Brazil. You can kind of see the name here on the map. So this was 1975. This was very remote rainforest area in Brazil. Take a look at 2001, at 25 years later, after a paved highway came through, loggers and farmers, and they completely transformed this land into a place for humans. And now all of this enormous area here is no longer available for any of the species that used to live there. So we have destroyed tons and tons of habitats, worse than fire or flood or drought or natural disasters ever could. And this is worldwide. This isn't just in Brazil, of course. Deforestation is also a major source, and this is, of course, for logging, for lumber, and for clearing farmland. And so we can see on the chart on the right, for those of you in my ankeny class, this is from your text. Those of you in the Ames class, you have the benefit of seeing this nice image. Ames and Boone, that is. So up here at the top, we see the original rainforest spread all along the equatorial zone, and it is about 50% reduced as of today. we see about 50% less rainforest than we did, which means 50% less habitat for the animals and plants that live there. Invasive species we've already talked extensively about, but it's a major way in which humans have influenced the the earth, basically. So we have on the left we have my favorite, the fire ant, right? We have fire ants that are extremely aggressive and they spread like crazy. And on the right we have kudzu, which as you see, these used to be trees. I assume these are just stumps now. So no more, but as it just seriously just blankets the entire southeast United States on the highway during the summer. The other examples are New Zealand. They introduced rats, which killed off the kakapo. I think that's how it is, something like that. It has, yeah, the kakapo. It's a flightless parrot, and there were no mammals, no predatory mammals on the island, and they just basically almost wiped out the entire population of the kakapo. I like this image. This is about lionfish, which were bought for aquariums, and it turns out that they're jerks and kill other fish, and they're also venomous. These spines are all venomous here. They're poisonous spines. And so we have bad lionfish. Good lionfish is a dead lionfish, and a great lionfish is a cooked lionfish. But I don't actually know if you can eat them. But I thought that was kind of funny. Overexploitation of resources is a huge, huge problem. This is Las Vegas in 1973. It was a lot smaller, it was a lot more centralized, and very, very few lawns. Take a look at the right in 2013. Look at the friggin' green in the middle of the desert. It shouldn't look like that. As much as I love green and grass and vegetation, the desert isn't supposed to look like that. This is water overexploitation. The water has to be pumped from somewhere, right, in order to feed these beautiful green lawns in the middle of the desert. So this is a huge issue. This is why xeriscaping is really valuable in places where there is little rainfall, which is basically you have rock yards with maybe a small patch of grass that takes very little maintenance, or native plants, for example. But yeah, overexploitation of water. Another example of overexploitation is this horrific image. These are skulls, just the skulls of American buffalo. And this was in the year 1870. And they were hunted to literal extinction. There are no longer any American buffalo. These are just the skulls. I mean, literal hundreds of thousands, and they were ground up. It was ground up for fertilizer and other products. So, yeah, we definitely did some damage there. Another way in which we have affected the environment very powerfully is by pollution. We pollute the environment with our products. And one of these is something that those of you who never gardened or farmed might not have ever considered before, but fertilizer. Fertilizer is a pollutant when it gets away from what you're trying to fertilize. So if you have, for example, a field where you have put fertilizer and it rains and you have runoff of rainwater, that water is going to carry the fertilizer into any area that it can. Now, the biggest problem is when we have water sources. So, lakes, rivers, ponds, and this is what we call an algal bloom. When we have an algal bloom, what it does is, if I draw a little schematic down on the bottom left, here we have aquatic plants. Let's do it in this dark green. Here's our water source. We have these aquatic plants going down at the bottom. And we should probably have some fish and I don't know, maybe snails and some other types of little small organisms, maybe a small fish. It's hard to see in the yellow, I know, but bear with me. Well, when we get fertilizer running into this water, it causes the algae, which is, there's some floating around all the time, it causes it to grow. And algae generally floats, and it will create a blanket on the top of the water. Great for the algae, right? What about all the other organisms? How are they going to get, how are the plants down here going to get the sunlight they need? Well, the answer is that they're not. And so they will die. And that means that when these die, there's less oxygen in the water. And when these decompose, they're going to increase the CO2 because the bacteria and the microorganisms that feed on them are going to respire and produce that CO2, which means that we're making this water very acidic and uninhabitable. So if there's no oxygen in the water, then the fish die and the snails die. And again, we up the CO2 even more from them decomposing. So an algal bloom doesn't just affect the algae, it affects everything in this entire little bitty aquatic ecosystem. If you did this as an experiment in a fish tank, would be how it worked. So fertilizer runoff is a big problem. Plastic trash, of course, we'll look at a picture of that in a second. Greenhouse gases, we'll look at the greenhouse effect, and also acid rain. I know that these seem like things that you talked about back in elementary school, but they're still relevant and still an issue. Here is a particularly striking photo of a boy with goggles swimming in extremely, extremely disgustingly polluted water. I mean, it looks like old clothing and plastic trash. I don't even know what all of these things are. A lot of plastic bags. Just shreds and paper and plastic. It looks like decaying cardboard and things all over the place. And this is just how life is. I mean, this is a slum area. I don't know where this picture is. I'm sure it has a source. But this is life for these people. And not just the people, but think about all of the organisms that live in this water. They're all being affected by this too. It's a huge issue. The greenhouse effect, we're just going to do the basics of this. This is also from the Phelan textbook that my Ankeny class uses. This is the way that if we start here at number 1, energy from the sun passes through the atmosphere and warms the Earth's surface. Some of the heat is able to escape and some is trapped on the Earth. Now, as the greenhouse gases increase, it makes this layer thicker here, and which means that less heat can escape and more will be trapped in the Earth's surface, which means that the temperature will increase. So what this has caused, if we look at the right, is the ice cap, this is the polar ice cap melting. So between 1979 and 2012, so just around 30 years, we see that we have had about, I would say, a 40 to 50% reduction in, maybe 40% reduction in the amount of ice that we see in the polar ice caps. And this is important because this is hunting grounds for animals. So walruses apparently have been abandoning their calves because they actually can't reach the food that they need to feed them because it's too deep. These are shallower areas than, say, over here. So that their populations are declining. And the fact that it's causing the oceans to rise because we're basically putting a whole bunch of melting a whole bunch of ice and putting it into the oceans. So it's causing a whole bunch of problems as well. Acid rain is due to burning fossil fuels mostly and chemical plants, things like that. So it produces sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide, which then combine with water to produce sulfuric acid and nitric acid. And both of these are very strong acids. And they actually will cause leaves to be damaged and basically burned and fall off, which decreases photosynthesis, which decreases the amount of oxygen that is being produced, and increases the amount of CO2 because not enough can be absorbed. And so we see a lot of, here is on the right, just a basic distribution of acid rain. So we are here-ish, I think, and we see a little bit of acid rain pollution, and a lot of this has to do with industry. A lot of the burning of fossil fuels and industrial processes will cause acid rain because of the release of the sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide.
Hey folks, Sarah from 2019 here. The previous part of the video was recorded back in 2017 in the fall, but I wanted to end with a little bit of an update. So what I wanted to introduce to you after that serious downer of a video is what can we do? Because it seems hopeless at times, because it's such a complex issue that it feels like we can't as individuals might do anything to mitigate these problems, but we can do small things. And I've listed some small things that you can do. For example, recycling. I'm going to put a map of DMAC, the Boone campus, up on Blackboard that shows you exactly where you can find the recycling bins. These are generic recycling bins that you can throw anything into, paper, plastic, uh, cardboard, and also glass and metal as well. So anything that you can recycle can go in there. I do want to remind you that no oil, grease, or detergent can be on your items, and you need to rinse them out before they can be recycled, or else they're going to be rejected and they're just going to be trashed anyway. Use reusable items as much as you can. Try not to use single-use plastic. Single-use plastic are things like Ziploc bags. Now, I am totally guilty of using Ziploc bags, but as much as I can, I try to use, say, reusable food containers. Or if I use a Ziploc bag, maybe even if it's kind of, mutilated after a while, maybe I can repurpose it into something else. So try to use items over again, and if you can't, then try to recycle them. If you can't reuse plastic shopping bags, there are usually places at some grocery stores like Walmart and possibly Hy-Vee that have grocery bag recycling receptacles where they will take those items. So plastic use and waste. If you have to make the choice between purchasing paper plates and, say, styrofoam or plastic plates, pick the paper. Paper is made from trees, from wood pulp, which means that those things are actually renewable to a point. Not completely renewable because they are thrown away, but you can actually get some of that paper back in planting trees. Not necessarily you, but the paper companies who do that. So water use is also a big one. And we live in an area that's pretty wet overall, but certainly areas that are drier need to be careful about water use. But one of the biggest ways that we can limit water use is by planting native plants. Now, you might not think about native plants, and we talked about the difference between native plants and invasive species or introduced species. But native plants, the wonderful thing about them is that they don't need extra water and usually not even extra fertilizer or anything. Because they're native to the area, they're going to grow in these exact conditions because that's where they're from. So if you picked up seeds, a little bag of seeds from the Earth Week fair with the butterflies, there was a little butterfly garden or monarch way station kind of display. If you picked up a bag of seeds, you can throw them out in the soil and they will grow and you don't have to care for them. That's wonderful because that means you don't have to apply any additional resources other than what nature provides. Zero escaping is another one. This is where people use rocks and native plants to instead of a lawn. Now, I don't mind a lawn, but I also think that they can be detrimental, especially remember the image of Las Vegas that I showed earlier. So that's a big deal. Try not to have monoculture lawns. Monoculture means just one type of species. So also things like dandelions. Dandelions we consider weeds, but weeds are usually just native types of grasses and plants, usually flowering plants. So turn water off while brushing your teeth. That's another one. That's something that I forget to do, but I try to pretty often. Right now we're in this beautiful part of spring. Today is April 27th, and you can open your windows when it's cool, or if you want some warmer air, open them up. And then during summer, when it gets really hot, close your windows and close the blinds or curtains to block out as much light as possible so you don't have to run the AC as much. Not only does it help the environment, but it also helps your checkbook uh, or your debit card. Nobody uses checks anymore. So one of the last things that I think is super cool is called citizen science. We are citizens of Iowa, of the United States, of the Earth, and we can do science projects at home. And that is what I think is super cool about citizen science. You could set up bird feeders and send data to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. You can send in soil samples. You can send in water samples to areas. I'm going to put a whole bunch of links on Blackboard when I find some, because I know of at least a few, so that you can access places where you can do some citizen science and really make a difference in the earth just by contributing to research by hardly doing anything extra. So take a little bit of time and do a little bit of duty to the earth. The earth is our provider, and we have a responsibility to take care of it. So mostly what you can do though is spread the word. And I know that it's kind of awkward to talk to your friends about recycling, but if you see somebody throw something away, ask them to recycle it instead. It's as simple as that. And if they challenge you, you learned it in biology, you learned it in college. This is a real deal, and we can't, if people don't do these things, we can't make it better. And we may not ever make it better, but we can improve our current situation a bit. Now, remember a few weeks ago, I played that podcast, The Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, just a little clip of it, where Casper, one of the hosts, was a full-time environmental activist, and he had the chance to go to Norway and up to the North Pole to, to observe and to learn about climate change and see it in person. And he saw this polar bear, and he was filled with this feeling of love and connectedness. And he said a quote similar to this: "We can't love what we don't understand, and we can't understand what we don't know." And now you know. That's the goal of this class, is for you to know more about the earth and climate and how it works. And you learned all kinds of things this semester. You should be so proud of yourself for how much you've done. And this is the only earth we'll ever have, and it's our job to preserve it. We're the only animals that can destroy the environment the way we have, the only organisms at all that live on earth that can do what they do what we do. And so we have a responsibility to take care of it. There's a quote, a really wonderful quote from Albus Dumbledore. Of course, we're back to Harry Potter. At the end of the fourth book, a boy has been killed by Lord Voldemort. And Dumbledore says these words: "If it comes to a time where you have to choose between what is right and what is easy, remember this boy. Remember this boy who died needlessly." And I really think that that's all the difference in choice. Is it right or is it easy? And sometimes there is no exact right answer. But remember the earth. We should care about it because we live here. It's the only home we'll ever have. I really want to thank all of you so much for an incredible semester. I learned so much every time I step into that classroom, and I hope that you have learned enough to get you through to your next classes. And I really wish all of you the best of luck. It's been a real pleasure being your instructor, and I feel very, very privileged to have met all of you. Have a wonderful summer, everyone. Take care.